This is Optometrists Building Empires, and I'm your host, Ankit Patel. Each week, we'll explore the journey of multi-practice ownership and leadership in optometry. Join us for insights and strategies from the top minds in our field. This show is sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team helps your office increase revenues, reduce costs, and reduce staffing headaches. Let's build your empire together. Hello, everyone. Welcome. And today's guest is another exciting person who's going to bring us some unique insights. She's an optometrist, speaker, entrepreneur, and proud mom of three. She's been recognized as a leading voice in eye health, featured in Time and Forbes, and honored with the prestigious William Feinblum Low Vision Award. She's her own host at the podcast Uncover Your Eyes, which brings common health concerns to the front line and while advocating for better eye health and systematic health for patients. She's the owner of 3 clinics in the Toronto, Canada area. Please welcome Dr. Meenal Agarwal. Meenal, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on this podcast. It's always interesting to hear different perspectives, and you have a pretty impressive background.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think people want to know what's the most important thing that helped you grow your empire with the podcast, the locations, the awards. Tell us about your secret sauce, or what you think your secret sauce is.
Oh my gosh. I think for me, obviously the generic stuff, like, we all want to have great people working with us, have that motivation, that drive. But for me, really early on when I graduated optometry, it was what the things I saw that I didn't want. So when I started working for, as an associate doctor at a couple practices, there were so many things that I would only pick up on the things I didn't want. So, little things like, I didn't like the way the staff were treated, or I didn't like the way the practice was run. And that was my driving factor to build my own clinics. It was, I don't want these things. And in order to make changes, I can't change other people's clinics. I need to build my own clinics and my own empire the way I want it to be run, and the way I want people to feel good, along with obviously finding great people to work with me. And I have a great team behind me that have been with me many, many years from the get-go, some of them. And just having that motivation that I need to do something on my own because I don't know if I can change somebody else's clinic. And I would say that was my driving factor.
Interesting. And so, it's funny because I think I talked to a lot of entrepreneurs and they almost have the exact same story. It's like, I didn't like working for someone else. I don't like the way they did things. So I was like, I'm just going to do it better. So can you give me a couple of examples? Well, we're going to talk about both sides of that, where you took a bet and said, I want this to be different. You tried it, it worked out, and one where it didn't.
Yeah. I think one thing that would always irritate me, and I think it irritates a lot of people, is the way staff are treated or the people are treated in a company, right? And I think that really hit me because I've always been a people's person. And, when I decided to choose my team, I always said, we are the family away from your family. And we want to make sure that we all can get along. Everybody has mutual respect and everybody understands that we're different people, just like in a family, brothers, sisters, you're different. But you have to, make it work and respect each other's differences. And I would say that finding those right people and putting them together in a team was something I would say I was successful in, hopefully, knock on wood. We always have the bad apples or those cave employees, but it's important to act on them quickly and kind of move them out of the team fast before you build a toxic work environment. That's something I learned over the years, was keeping toxic cave employees with you too long can infiltrate the team very fast to a point where you have to let the entire team go because it's just infiltrated. So it's better to, recognize that sooner before it infiltrates the team.
Interesting.
Yeah. And sorry, I missed your second question.
Well, you kind of touched on it. It's like, when did you try something new that didn't work out well? Like, you're like, I want to do this differently, and realize, no, there's a reason why we do it this way. Was there any example like that you had?
I think there's so many things that didn't work out, but I think what it is that you can change it fast because it's your business. I'm sure there's so many things. whether it's small things like, um, the way you do recalls or the way you address your patients or the way, you have a manager or a clinic lead, the way your clinic is set up, micromanaging. I was a micromanager at the beginning and I thought, oh, I'm going to be so great because I know how to do everything and I'm just so involved and I'm obsessed with work. But that was not the right answer. And, I had to take a step back. And if I'm going to be a manager, I had to learn how to manage the clinic and have my people aligned such that they all know their roles so that I'm not taking on everything and also not trusting them. So I'm going to say that's something I learned because I was a really big micromanager at the beginning.
What does that journey look like for you? Like, how long did it take? What did you do to expand and learn? Because that's a big change. That's really hard because usually it's at least from my perspective and what I've seen, folks, is trust. Like, do I trust you to do this? And if I have challenges with trust internally, man, that's hard. Like, how did you what was your journey look like from
Yeah.
micromanaging to now you have 3 locations? You're not everywhere at once. You probably have a great team. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But what did you do to make that transition?
It took many years. I wanna say at least 10 years.
Oh,
I wanna
wow.
say at least 10
Okay.
years, yeah. Because I am super anal about the way things are done, and, I'm also really obsessed with my own businesses, I need to know everything, need to make sure every, review is replied to by me, make sure every patient, difficulty situation is handled by me. Um, so I think the key was, I mean, it took me a long time, but finally, those initial people who had opened the clinics with me, trusting them and saying, I now get that you understand the way I run the clinic after 10 years, and you understand me, the business. I'm going to let you handle this. Um, but actually empowering them and finally handing that over to them was actually shocking. They probably are doing better than me at handling those certain things that I was. And I think it's the fact that I just never empowered them. I never gave them that capability.
Mhm.
And now they're empowered. They do things. They reply to reviews. They deal with difficult, patient queries. There are people that are still micromanaged. I would say more of the basic admin tasks, which are, our recalls completed, our 1-day calls completed. But those are now managed by these, people that I have empowered to
Yeah.
manage. Yeah. So I'm not micromanaging everything. But also, I think it took me a long time to build I want to call it a hierarchy. Like, there's me, but there's also, I have a manager at each, I have a manager who oversees my clinics. Then I have clinic leads who lead each clinic. Right. So, there's certain, ladder, and each person is responsible for the person above, just like in a company. And I think what the issue is, or at least with me, was I always saw my optometry business as an optometry business, almost like, a small store or, whatnot. I never really thought I was a corporation. But I honestly think you have to run your family practices, even if they're small, 8 people, 9 people, like a corporation. You have to have people, there's responsibilities, there's liabilities, there are people in charge. You have to have all those things. And I think I didn't initially. And so everything was a mishmash and I was just kind of overseeing everything. But once you discover that you need to have those in place, and hopefully people listening to this will set that up sooner rather than later. And, I was really young. I think I was 24 when I opened my first practice. And then my second practice was just like 2 years after that. So I think I didn't even have a bank card at that point. Like I had just got my debit card, the regular, and I went to the bank and I'm like, "Can I have a loan?" I didn't know anything about banking. I was, like I really didn't know anything about business. We weren't
Yeah.
trained about this stuff. So learn from my mistakes and obviously, start that responsibility empowering others much sooner than I did. But it took me a long time.
And I'm hearing something that is, kind of built in, and you said at the beginning, it sounds like, uh, I'll use the analogy of making and this is not a bad analogy, but I think it illustrates the point. Making a meal. If you're using the freshest produce from the market that day, it's gonna be delicious if you're just using clean ingredients, as long as you don't burn the food, right? Burning the food might be micromanaging, equivalent of micromanaging good ingredients. But if this produce is weeks old, it's frozen or is spoiled, it's going to be a crappy meal, even if you have a Michelin star chef cooking it. So picking
Absolutely.
vetting the right people for the right culture, and then understanding, hey, is this going to be charred? Am I blackening the salmon? Or is it going to be like something that if it's sashimi tuna, I don't want to overcook that, right? I'm using some crazy
Absolutely.
food analogies I like to eat, but maybe I'm just hungry. But it's kind of it's like meeting people where they are and for what they are and how to manage them appropriately. It sounds like that journey took about 10 years for you to kind of collate that, understanding how to get the right people, how to train the right people in the right situation. There's actually a process called situational leadership, is what it kind of reminds me of. It's you kind of assess people on willingness and capability or competence. And depending on where they fall in that quadrant, you are either coaching them or you're being very directive or you're just like, hey, you come to me. Right. It just depends on where they are in that cycle. And every task can
Absolutely.
be different. You offer a different insight based off of that assessment. Which it sounds like
Absolutely.
you kind of intuitively are doing that.
Yeah, and I like your analogy even about the chef because like, the whole produce thing, you know, if you have great people that are working for you, but you don't have a great manager who understands the people, you will also fall apart, right? So it's like each role has to be great. Your manager has to be great and the people have to be willing to work and, motivated. So one bad apple can really crumble the whole thing. And we've all had them and we've all tried to save them and let's keep them going. Let's try our best to motivate them. Let's have talks with them. Let's do these things. But eventually listen to your gut. There you reach a point in time where you're like, that's it. I
Yeah.
can't train you. And I am a strong believer in if anybody can take one thing home from this today, it is you can't train personality. You can train skills, but you cannot train personality. And I have tried it time and time again, felt bad for people, hired them, tried, worked with them. It does not work. They are what
Yeah.
they are. You can tweak things, but you cannot train their personality. You cannot train them to smile. You cannot train them to have, a great personality and be great with customer service. You cannot train them to be people's people, and you cannot train them to get along with other staff if they are sour, unmotivated people. Um, and also finding those triggers that motivate people, right? Some people are motivated by money, so increasing their pays. Some people are actually surprisingly not motivated by money, and that's a surprising fact. It's what happened with me is the people I thought were motivated by money were actually not. And that's interesting because you actually will never find out who's motivated by money. You have to try it and see. Does their performance, and you have to actually quantify their performance and see is their performance increasing based on, you rewarding them with, money versus praise. There's a lot of people out there that actually just want praise and or feel wanted, feel good. And I think sometimes even just saying, "Hey, you did a great job today" in
Yeah.
front of everybody is more than an increase, a raise.
Yeah.
So, don't underestimate, the value of your people and how much they do want to be respected or praised.
I know that, one way that, there's a concept at EOS called a people analyzer, if people wanna Google it. We do with our office a lot, and it's helped us with the culture side is, our values and defining what that looks like in terms of behaviors. So our values are care. C is curiosity, A is always on stage, R is relentless, E is elevate. And we literally sit down with someone and say, "Hey, this was not a good example of curiosity. You really didn't ask questions or go dive deeper. This is what curiosity would look like. Can you do that?" And so it gives us a nice framework to say, these are the behaviors we need to see, and quickly vets out folks who can, "Oh, I just didn't understand that and know that. Now I actually do that," versus,
Or
"No, it's
yeah.
just not bridging the gap." And so I think you're right. It's like, it's not necessarily just the personality, but I find that it's also the personality that's right for the leadership and the team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You have to have the right players and the right combination of players. That is, and one thing that happened with me was actually I changed positions of team members. So there were team members that kind of got demoted, but if they were a manager, I demoted them to something else. But I didn't make it seem like a demotion. It was a shift in roles. Because, when I found out that that manager was not a great manager, was not able to tell others what to do, was more of their friend, I actually moved her role somewhere else just so she didn't feel that I'm being demoted. But, it was more, I think you're really good at this role and I want to shift you there. So understanding who's great at what and shifting them accordingly. But we underestimate, I know we were saying this at the beginning that everyone you talk to says the people. Um, but I'm sure people get from this conversation that most of what we're talking about is the people. And the people are really what are going to make you succeed because you cannot micromanage and be at your practice 24 hours a day. And it's not, you will not have a work life balance and you will not be able to run
Yeah.
your businesses successfully. So you need to believe in the people and have those people aligned.
So I'm curious now, were all three of your practices cold starts?
Yes.
And what did you run into that you didn't expect as you were growing your businesses?
Oh my gosh, what did I run into? I mean, I think I ran into everything. I think underestimating the cost of running a business was a big one. I was young coming out, and I had no knowledge of running a business. I'd barely worked as an associate, probably minimum a year, and just jumped into it because I just wanted to. And I think the cost of running a business and how to quantify your KPIs and what are your KPIs, like understanding how do I evaluate my business and evaluate the profit in my business was uh, I had no idea, and it was shocking to me. But for the first year or 2 even, I was just working to work and, "Okay, let's trek along," and then you reach a point you're like, "I'm not making much money here." My costs might be almost running higher than my profit. So then it's like, "Okay, well, now I gotta have my KPIs. What is important to me? What generates me the income?" And then, you kind of have your list or your spreadsheet of your KPIs, start evaluating that month on month, um, and then year on year. And now we have a system in place now where we're like, evaluating all those numbers, growth, evaluating it per person as well. Um, so every staff gets, a review every 3 months on just understanding where they're at. Doctors also get one understanding so setting goals for their own KPIs. I mean that it's a whole system that I was completely oblivious to at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. It sounds like the people side is the theme I'm hearing is like, okay, that was a lot harder. And then also you said something insightful. Is like, wait, it's way more expensive than I thought. So,
Yeah.
where were some? Do you remember what some of those expenses were, or was it just a feeling of like, how is this so expensive?
Yeah, I think it was just a feeling of why am I not making any money,
Oh, okay.
right? Because when you see not much profit is going into the bank account, and then you're like, I have to draw an income, and you're like, okay, there's not much to draw from at that point. I mean, I would say a successful business starts making profit usually at 5 years. That's
Yeah.
generally the rule of thumb. When you talk to accountants, that you will start making profit in about 5 years, especially if you buy the unit. But after 1 or 2 years, you're like, "I at least wanna take out something." And if you're like, "Oh my gosh," there's not much coming out, then you're like, "Okay, yes, I'm seeing patients, but I think I've been totally oblivious to the fact that maybe it's not enough patients to cover my costs, or maybe I'm not recommending enough,
Mm.
contact lens refits, LASIK referrals. Maybe I'm not actively making those recommendations that should have been made, but also will help grow my business."
And it's interesting because, in Canada, help me understand how this works. Do you also have retail sales with glasses?
Yes.
Now, it's a little bit different though, right? Because the Canadian health system pays for the majority of it. Is there a cash option too? My understanding is the optical is not quite the same as it is in the US in terms of revenue sources. Is that right?
The optical part is the biggest source of revenue
Oh, it
for
is.
us.
Okay.
So if people buy glasses, that's great for us. And most of it is self-pay. If they have private insurance, they can bill a portion of it, usually not a lot with private insurance. So people are essentially paying out of pocket for glasses. But that is our bread and butter. Absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay. And so now we talk a lot about people. I imagine, I understand. I know Toronto's market a little bit because you hear about it in the news, just because of like the highest housing prices.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing labor costs are going up, and it's harder. Is it harder to find people there? Like, how are you dealing with that challenge?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I don't know if it's everywhere, but definitely here. I mean, minimum wage has also gone up significantly. But um it's hard to find good people. It's not even about the payment. I think we would be willing to pay people more if they were, motivated and great with sales.
Mm,
But I think it's just the market is I think across the board most of us feel that people don't want to work, right? And a lot of people are adopting I want to work from home. And unfortunately our profession is such that you can't.
yeah.
And a lot of people are I would like to work 3 or 4 days a week, but make the same amount of money, and that's the key, right? And this is where I'm not understanding that mentality. If you make a conscious decision to work less days a week, you will make less money. But their expectation is they will calculate their pay in
Mm,
order to make the same amount of money that they would in 5 days, but
yeah.
in 3 days, and they have that expectation from us. So, I have employees that have gone down to 3 days a week because that's great for their,
Yeah.
work-life balance, but then they'll come to me within a couple months saying, "Can I get a raise?" And I've noticed that their raise jump would be equivalent to what they would have in 5 days. So, I think it's a combination of people are more in tune with their mental health. People want time off, and I get that, and I'm an advocate of that. Um, and I definitely think people need to work less if that's what's better for them mentally and health wise. But that is making it harder for us, right?
Mm,
Because now we've gone down and we need to hire more part-time employees. They also want to be very part-time and it's just there's not enough of them. It's not enough
mm.
part-time employees that want to work. And unfortunately we lose good people for that reason.
It's interesting. Some of the strategies some of the other folks on the podcast have talked about, and more than one person has talked about this, which is interesting. It makes me. I think we're going to test in our office at some point. Is we're open 6 days a week, but all shifts are 4 days, so they're 4 9s basically, right? Because we're open lunch, 4 9s, 4 10, somewhere around there. So you still get 36, 40 hours ish, maybe a little bit overtime.
Right.
You can do it in 4 days, and a lot of folks have been really successful with that. And
Yes.
when you can advertise no nights and weekends, it's really nice in 4 day, 3 day weekends or 3 days off during the week. Because if we're open Monday through Saturday, so someone would get Monday off, some people get Saturday off, and it probably would rotate. But
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned that because that was something that I also learned over time was people value 2 days off in a row. So
mm,
it used to be that we would give somebody like a Wednesday off in between and they would work Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And I was like I thought that was normal and I was okay with that because that's what I did, right? I had my Sundays off and then I had a weekday off. Um to me it didn't matter.
mhm,
But I didn't realize how many people actually care to have 2 days off in a row.
mhm,
So, including associate doctors, not just,
mm,
I mean, ours are self-employed still. So everybody wants a 2-day together off and unfortunately we do have to be open some evenings and obviously Saturdays.
yeah,
So what I like to do is I like to spread the wealth. So
mm,
you'll work okay the Monday evening, but then you won't work the Tuesday and Wednesday evening, right? And versus, so I go through the shifts. We have like a whole spreadsheet of everybody's shifts so that if they leave, a new employee comes in, we know, everybody gets a balance and it's
mm,
fair for the weekends and weekdays and weekday evenings. Um, and you know what? I'm glad you mentioned the 4 days because that wasn't even me consciously making it 4 days. People have naturally dropped to 4 days in my office. So it's like doctors have all dropped to 4 days. Slowly they were working 6 days, some of them, and then they went to 5. Like, oh, can we also have that day off now? They're 4. So I think just that's the norm now. Everybody just wants 4s. So now when I hire people, I automatically ask, when you say full time, do you mean 4 days a week, 3 days a week, or in how many hours do you mean, right? Because our full time, like the way we were raised and our generation was working 6 days, like 8, 9-hour days, right? That's different from today's full time. Today's full time generally is 3 to 4 days a week, 9-hour shifts.
Hmm. That's interesting. So you kind of naturally came to that.
Yeah.
Um, Excellent. And so let's talk shift gears a little bit about what you're excited about. You have a pretty deep experience, a lot of good awards from eye care health. Tell us what you're excited about in the industry and for your practice, like the future of the field as it relates to in general and in Canada, right? Because a
Right.
lot of the audience is US based, but we do have Canadians too. So I'm curious to hear your perspective. And if you know enough about the US system, can you just tell us some if there's differences in what you see in the future?
Absolutely. I think my frustration with the profession has always been um, a very cookie cutter profession. And I've always been someone, who wants to learn everything about everything. I was a nerd for lack of a better word. And I think in the profession, we're very, especially in our time when we graduated, it was thought of that we were literally refractors. And yeah, we can diagnose a few diseases, but we don't do much about it. And I think over time, I'm grateful to our professions, our associations, that we have evolved to a point where there's actually respect for us as optometrists and there's respect for the profession and us diagnosing, treating, managing eye diseases. But where I want to see our profession headed is talking about systemic diseases as well, right? And I still see that so many doctors or optometrists are confined to just talking about eyes. And that's actually why my podcast was born. Was hopefully or naturally I would get a lot of more optometry listeners because I'm in the profession, and maybe they'll get motivated to talk about systemic diseases and know and learn more about other diseases out there such that they can talk to their patients. A small example is the other day I had a patient who said to me, I said, we were going through her health history and I said, is that it? And she goes, well, there's one more thing, but you probably don't need to know about it. And it's PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome. And I'm like, no, I'd like to know about that. And I'm like, so are you on metformin for it or are you on any medication? And she was shocked that I even knew about that. And I said, okay. And I even delve into a bit of like the hormonal thing around it. And being cautious of sugars. And she was so appreciative. And she actually said to me, no one's ever told me to be cautious of my sugars. She goes, I know what PCOS is, and I know eventually I could become insulin resistant with time. But no one's ever told me to like now start watching my diet, late 30s. And I think that's so important for us to be, she'll always remember me, hopefully, as a respected, doctor who actually gave her some knowledge that maybe was missed, right? And I think it's important for us to respect ourselves, our knowledge, gain knowledge. It's in our hands to train our patients to believe that we are respected part of the profession. And that's where I want to see the profession headed. Because I think those days are done where we are I've had so many patients who have canceled on me Saturday mornings to go get their haircut. I got an appointment with my last minute with my haircut lady, last minute with my waxing lady. And I'm like, I am less important than your waxing lady, clearly, right? You would rather cancel my appointment. So their appointments are more lucrative and less available and I'm super available. You can cancel on me any minute, right? And you'll
Mm.
get an appointment the next day. Um, we're done with that. Those times are done. We need to have respect for ourselves, our profession, each other, and our time. And I think that's why really the podcast was born because that's where I want to see our profession headed as not just eye care providers, but as total health providers, because that is the eyes are the only place, and everybody knows this, but they're the only place in the entire body that you can see blood vessels. There is no other doctor, there is no other professional that can see blood vessels. Like, we should be at the top of the list, not at the bottom of the list,
Mm.
let alone under the waxing ladies, right? So, like, I mean, to me, that was the frustrating part of the profession. Now, in terms of Canada and US is definitely ahead of us in that sense, right? A lot of optometrists work in hospitals. They have more of a scope of practice, so they're able to, perform minor procedures, prescribe more drugs than us. So I do want to say that you guys are ahead of that, and probably, more respected in the sense of systemic health. um Canada has a long way to go still.
Yeah. Well, I think nice. It's nice to hear it's by degree, not by kind. It's not like it's completely different. It's just more like, okay, it's increased scope of practice is kind of
Absolutely.
the thing that we hear. And I agree. It's such a unique position. And it just, well, side note, with AI with capturing pictures of the eye, I was reading there's all sorts of cool things that with OCT scans and fundus photos, that you can start picking up things like heart disease at an early age, because there's some correlations there apparently. So still a little bit of research needs to be done, but I think that's, like you said, it's like a primary care point, which is
Yeah,
exciting.
I mean, and even things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, right? People don't talk enough about um, when someone visually can't see. So, macular degeneration, glaucoma, and they are not corrected to the best of their ability. Um, that puts more of a load on their brain, right? And 50% of the brain is involved in visual processing. So if 50% of the brain is more strained because we are having trouble seeing, we are going to develop Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and all these cognitive diseases much earlier than, other people. So, and that's something people want to know about. So I think that it is time that we start discussing these diseases. Why do you need to be corrected? Why do you need to have great vision? Why do you need to see your eye doctor? Yeah, because if you're not seeing your eye doctor regularly and you're 75 and you're coming in every 5 years and there's a decline in your vision, you might develop Alzheimer's and all these things much earlier. We need to have those conversations. And then, nutrition. I know a lot of doctors in the profession are really advocating for nutrition. And I'm really grateful for them. There's, I think, a group on LinkedIn, I forget the exact name, but it's, nutrition, ocular nutrition,
Yeah.
society. And um, that's huge because everyone's talking about gut health and nutrition and health in general and good foods. But why for the eyes? I mean, it's always been a myth about carrots, but nobody talks about I mean, it's not just carrots, but nobody talks about all the great foods that we need for great eye health. And your gut and your brain are connected through the enteric nervous system. So you're getting in good foods is naturally helping your brain, which is naturally helping your visual processing system, right? So we are limiting the eyes to just the eye socket. We are not talking about the whole picture. And I'm grateful for all these doctors that are starting now to advocate these things. I think we can really rise in this profession.
Yeah. Um, if you had to triple the size of your business, go from 3 to 9, how would you do it? And this is more just a hypothetical, just to see how you think about growth.
Yeah. To be honest, I think it would be easy for me in the sense of um, having those systems in place where you know how to run your business. What are the first steps to set up a business and how do you get it going? I think, and having the people or that team that can cross between your practices to set those up. Is actually simpler than people think. I mean, really setting up your practices, the first one or two is a difficult one. When I set up my third, it was super easy. I literally think I took the space within a week and we were set up with IT, everything ready to see patients in 10 days. So, I mean, where there's a will, there's a, way. And I think you can do it. It's just about knowing the formula, right? And the formula of what works for you. What are your first steps when you set up a practice? Get the people in place, get the IT in place, get the, registration, your website, get things in place. What do you need to do? and have the right people doing it. It's not all me doing it, right? I have the right people. I know what my manager can do. I know what my clinic leads can do. And I know what people are great at handling my website, what people are great. It's having the people. And I think we like to take everything on as human beings ourselves, especially as CEOs or managers. Everybody likes to take everything on themselves, but it's about delegate to the right people and you can grow to nine. And I would love to do that. I think now I've come to a place in my life where, my concentration is really advocating and my podcasting, which
Yeah.
is about advocating. And I think that's what satisfies me now. Um, but, you know, if there was an opportunity to grow and it was at the right time in my life, absolutely.
Excellent. Yeah, I like that, and you don't necessarily have to grow the same way. So as you grow, we expand your empire. It sounds like the podcast is sort of the next frontier for you.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little bit about the podcast. I'm curious. Uncover your eyes. So tell us about. And by the way, we'll put in the show notes the link to the podcast. But I'm curious, like, what kind of stuff do you talk about?
Yeah, anything health related. It is not a podcast only about eyes. It's called Uncover Your Eyes. So I mean, obviously I'm an eye doctor, so that was the best name for it. But it's not all about the eyes. It is about all health, related topics, whether it's menopause or whether it's mental health, gut health. We have all sorts of guests on, cardiologists,
Mm,
naturopaths, talking about specific conditions. And I think that all of them, everything again, is related to the eyes. And I think it's so important that we as doctors are well versed on all these systemic issues. And again, it was born out of frustration, working with many doctors or hearing many doctors that didn't believe that we were good enough. And they felt it in themselves that they didn't know enough about systemic health or that they didn't need to talk about it. And that's really why it was born. But there are a lot of episodes focusing on mental health or well-being as well, and that's because that's something I'm very passionate about, and, I know in Canada and, I'm not sure about the US, but in Canada, it is rare that an optometrist talks about their mental health.
mm,
And that was a big, and it was almost looked down upon if I ever talked about mental health to anybody related to a company or corporation, they would almost look down upon me that you want to do a lecture on that. Can you talk about myopia control instead?
mhm.
Or dry eyes, there was nobody ever was allowing me to speak about mental health and it was affecting so many of us. So, I said, you know what? Screw this. I'm gonna have a podcast, and the first episode is gonna be about mental health, right? And
Right.
that was my driving factor, almost rejection. And I need the world to hear this. And funny enough, after I did that episode, um, I had a couple of colleagues who I wasn't close to, or I didn't know very well, but they actually privately messaged me on LinkedIn, and some of them were male colleagues, so we can't just assume mental health is female, right? And said, "Thank you for that episode." Um, and that's when I said, "Okay, I've made a difference." And, I've gone to conferences and things where people have come up to me and said, you know, "I felt the same way as you," or, "What can I do?" Right? And, I'm not a psychologist or psychotherapist or therapist, but I think it's important that we share our stories so that we can relate to one another and, um, build our empires further if we can help each other. If we're mentally healthy, we will have successful practices.
Okay.
If we are not mentally healthy, you cannot run a successful practice. You will crumble. That's the bottom line. So everyone will see it. You won't be able to handle it. And that's just the way it is. So for me, mental health is the first piece to the puzzle.
Gotcha. I like that. Um, and so I want to shift gears just a little bit. Tell us, like, oh, this made an impression on me and changed something about me. Could have been when you were younger, could have been more recent. Just something that helps us understand what makes you tick.
Um, Rejection.
Hmm.
Rejection makes me tick.
Okay.
Yes, yes. It is actually a motivating factor for many of us, and a lot of us don't realize that. That when we are rejected, Sometimes that's good. Sometimes that, door being closed on you, will motivate you to do something further. And yes, there has been many things I have been rejected from, both in and outside the profession. And those have driven me either to do something more, or different. And I think maybe that has made me a happier person or a better person. And, I always look at it positive that those rejections were, helping me reach, the path that I was supposed to be on. Um, but I will say that that is like literally what makes me tick. It's, if I'm rejected from something, I will work on something else or the same thing 10 times more. But I will not be, um, mad at the person or whatever it is. It would just be like, okay, that's it. I've got to prove to myself that I can do better.
Okay. Excellent. That's a good, I think, it's interesting. I think that's a lot of like entrepreneur origin stories. It's like,
Yeah.
someone told me I couldn't do this or didn't believe it's possible. So that's pretty cool. Um, let's take, let's go back to, let's say 1 week after graduation. What advice would you give to your younger self?
Yeah. I would say to my younger self that everything's going to be okay and that I am capable of doing more things that I even thought I would be. And that there's more in store for me that, like, I wouldn't even imagine. I never thought I would be, like, into business. I never thought I was entrepreneurial. I had no idea. Again, I just had my bank card, I had no idea that I was capable of all of this. So I would just, say, "Don't stress, just relax, and things will work out."
That's good. That's good insight. It's easy. I think a lot of folks listening are also students. So hopefully some of these
Yeah.
resonate with them as well.
Yeah.
If people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Absolutely. So, I am on all social media platforms. It's, and maybe you'll probably link it there, but it's, Meenal Agarwal. I'm also on LinkedIn if anybody wants to, private message me. And that's probably the easiest way to just get in touch with me.
Excellent. And we'll put this all in the show notes along with your YouTube link for your podcast if you want to check you out on your podcast.
Absolutely.
So, so Dr. Meenal Agarwal, thank you again for being a guest.
Thank you so much, Ankit, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, this is fun. And thank you, audience. If you learned something today, laughed, or just enjoyed it, please tell someone and please share and subscribe to the podcast or YouTube feed. Thank you again, Dr. Agarwal. This has been another exciting episode of Optometrists Building Empires, and we'll see you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Optometrists Building Empires. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, visit buildingempires.live. This show is proudly sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team was born out of staffing challenges my wife and I faced together, managing multiple optometry locations. We refined our approach at Classic Vision Care and now offer our expertise to others. If you're experiencing challenges with staffing and you'd like to set up a discovery call, we'd be happy to help you and connect you with the right resources. We'll see you next time.